Facebook realized that if they're able to implement their pixel, they can connect you across a bunch of different websites, track all these visits that you've been doing across all these websites.
Certified homies, welcome to another episode of From A to B. You have Shiva, and I'm joined by Eddie, the Techie, Aguilar. How do you like that nickname?
That was pretty good. It was actually good.
I was thinking for the longest time, like, what can I do that encompasses you? And it was so much easier to come up with a nickname for Eddie because so many things rhyme with Eddie. And I was like, Eddie, the Techie. Boom. Did it. Love it. Smart fucking tech guy.
Thank you.
So Eddie, you're the founder of Blazing Growth, which is a revenue operations agency, but you do a lot of cool shit. My first intro with you was actually through Experiment Nation, where you and I were on another podcast, CR No. You remember that?
Oh yeah, I still think about it to this day.
Yeah,
so.
It was you, me, Siobhan, and Kenya. That was fun. Some good ass times. I have had conversations with you that are very super technical. And that's why I wanted to bring you on as basically walk me through the intricacies, how technology kind of works through everything together when it comes specifically to A/B testing platforms. And I guess just, I'm not unique to A/B testing platforms, just A/B testing platforms, marketing tools, cookies, GDPR. There's a lot of buzzwords there. I hope that this is a conversation that people could take away of I now understand how everything works together. And I say that from you and I both living in the US where GDPR is we're in the US, we're privacy? What's that? I don't know what that is, right? So, but a lot of Europeans are more intimately aware of it. But there's a lot of US people working for companies that have international presences. So my hope is that we can take away a dumbed down version, but you smarten it up so we understand how all of these things work together. And we could confidently think about how we do A/B testing, how we do brand campaigns, stuff like that. Ready, the Techie?
Yeah, let's get into this.
All right. What is a cookie?
It's basically a text file that your browser reads from the computer. So you have a text file stored on your computer somewhere within this browser, and its folders. And in that text file, you have data that you can essentially store, right? Your browser, when you hit a website, there's two different things. There's called the client side, which is what your physical machine's version of it is. And then it's called the server side. That's, what everything in the website is running, essentially, right? The server tends to set the cookies on the client side. Usually, you can do this either through, PHP, on the client side, you can do it with JavaScript. A lot of companies right now mostly do it through JavaScript.
These are all coding
languages.
Things.
Yeah,
coding languages.
So JavaScript's the biggest one right now. It took over the internet like a wildfire, essentially. And a lot of people back in the day, when they would use cookies, it was a way to get information that you essentially gave them already. It was a way to retrieve this information much faster without you having to give up that information all over again. A lot of companies still leverage it that way to this day. However, we've had people and companies that abuse that, right? One of the biggest ones people still use it to this day is obviously Facebook. And I'm going to use Facebook as an example because they are one of the first culprits, or not really first, but one of the first that were massive, right? And got called out on it. Facebook, they'll use their server to basically set a cookie on your browser, which is whatever, Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Safari, right? And what would happen is Facebook would also set some information inside these cookies that gives some details around your current browsing session, or maybe, your previous browsing session. And then they associate that with an ID, a unique identifier to be able to distinguish you specifically. Now, all this information, can be stored in a cookie. Cookie really is just a text file, like I said, that just gets pulled by the browser and is in a readable computer, format. At some point, Facebook realized that if they're able to implement their Pixel, essentially use signing into Facebook on a person's website, they can connect you across a bunch of different websites, right? And track all these visits that you've been doing across all these websites. That's where a lot of people started getting concerned about what is a cookie.
Can I summarize real quick?
Yeah.
So I think to really, really, really dumb it down, a cookie is something that's set within your browser. Like you could go deep into your actual computer files in the Chrome and find this cookie. It's a text file and it contains effectively a little bit of your digital footprint anonymized in some way. And it has info about you, potentially some of your demographic information based on whatever information set, I'm Shiva, I'm in Austin, I'm a man. And it can also contain some other behavioral things, like you clicked on an ad when you were on a cooking site and that ad contained other information. And that could be many other cookies. There are many cookies for many sites. It's not like it's one cookie it's not like one cookie to rule them all. There are many cookies across sites, but it's just a way of communicating some behavior and information about that user, and it's stored in a file. Like you said, client side, that's on your computer, but then there's also server side information that they'll also pass as well. Fair to say?
It can also store page details, right? Not necessarily user details, but let's just say page details.
What does that mean, page details?
What elements you've seen. If you've scrolled past a certain point.
It could also contain stuff like, did you buy something? Did you not buy something? What did you buy? How much did you pay?
And the thing is, a lot of companies can either tie this back to the user or they can just use it to build page experiences, right? Going back to Facebook, they tied it to the user. They tied every single cookie across to the user, right? And back in the day, a lot of people didn't do that. They just used it more for page experiences. That was more or less the turning point, of cookies, rather than just setting personal details about a user anonymously or not onto a cookie. A lot of people started getting concerned with it because it's how are they using these cookies, right? And that wasn't really a thought too much back when the internet was really getting traction.
People assume the best of intentions with websites, but can you give me an example of where cookies have been used maliciously? Just one. Only one example exists in the world, right?
I think I started off with a pretty good one, but Facebook. The malicious intent there is people can start using this Facebook login, right? And because they have information about your cookies too, it's they're able to get into your Facebook depending on where you logged in from, right? And that's been a big problem is people get their Facebooks hijacked all the time. And it's because they leverage, their logins in random websites most of the time. And that's a lot of details that you can potentially give up, right?
And also part of that maliciousness is in privacy and lack of consent in sharing the information. So for example, if I went to Bob's Boot Shop and in person, it's not like it would be publicly available to the world unless I published an update or wrote a blog post that I'm consenting to share this information if I just went to Bob's Boot Shop in person. But on the internet, if I go to bobsbootshop.com, that information is stored in a cookie. And then that information through Facebook or through other means, some of that maliciousness comes from that information shared to other advertisers, right? To let them know Shiva went to Bob's Boot Shop. And that wasn't something that I actively consented to share that information. What if I wanted to be anonymized? What if I went and shopped for adult things or other things that I don't want people to have known that I shopped for? It's a consent thing, right? That's an issue that people don't want that information shared unless they consent to it.
Yeah. And when you say consent, what you're actually doing is you're telling the company or the website that you're on, like Bob's Boot Shop, you're okay with the Facebook servers tracking you. You're okay with the Google Ads servers tracking you, right? Because what they do is you implement an HTML essentially with a link to their servers, right? And then their servers are the ones that are setting the cookie. So now you're talking about first party identification. You're talking about third party identification.
Can you quickly go over what's the difference between the two?
So first party is when Bob's Boot Shop, or 0P is, zero party, or first party is when Bob's Boot Shop is the one that is serving the cookie, essentially. They're the ones that are placing the cookie on your browser. Now, if you have Facebook placing the cookie, if you have Google placing the cookie, then that's third party because it's not a part of Bob's Boot Shop.
That's where people have issues with it. It's like, I went to Bob's Boot Shop. I'm happy to give Bob's Boot Shop my information, but it's almost like a creepy stalker that's like waiting outside of Bob's Boot Shop in person, and they're just like watching you and like writing down what you do. I didn't consent to a stalker watching me.
A good way to explain it is like, these celebrities, when they go out by themselves, you have the paparazzi waiting for them outside to take pictures.
So what you're saying is I'm a celebrity because Facebook is watching me.
On the internet, everyone's a celebrity. That's why the data...
No, don't downplay it. I'm a celebrity.
I mean, that's why data is so big, right? Because right now...
It's a big business because you have access to so much of this other data. And I think that's part of it's like the data collection. And then with this mass repository of data, you could do shit with it. You could sell it, and that's a big business, right? Or you could use it to serve ads and do other stuff with it, including selling it, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of like where cookies are at, right? They can be used for nefarious reasons, or they also can be used for behavioral and even personalization like usage, right?
So give me an example of that. What would be a good use, a non-nefarious use case for cookies?
Let's say you visited this website multiple times and you are kind of tired of seeing the pop-ups. Even though pop-ups are little whatever, I'm not a big fan of pop-ups. But let's say you click an X, right? You close it out. You don't want to see it again, right? You can store that action of essentially not wanting to see it again into a cookie. And then that way the browser will always check to see if that cookie is available. And if it's available, what is the value of that cookie, right? It could be yes, like, continue seeing the pop-up or whatever, or like, closed out pop-up, right, as a value.
Another example is when people like log into a website like Walmart, right? And then they close their window, they try and log back in 3 days later. It remembers some of that information. It's stored in that cookie. So they don't have to keep on typing the information over and over again, right?
It hashes the values of your passwords, right? It tries to, it protects it more or less. It's like it puts it in a safe code, right? It doesn't give the exact password. There was a time when the internet, and this is where like nefarious reasons started coming out, but there was a time on the internet where people, like companies didn't do that. Like they just straight up put your password in raw format.
I'm glad we've evolved.
Yeah.
So something that you see a lot, and it's not as it's not as present in like US sites, but it is present, I think legally required in all European sites, is this cookie banner. You are consenting to opt in or opt out, or have the option to opt out for tracking, right? Explain a little bit of like why Europe has it versus not, and what exactly does that do?
It kind of goes back now to that first party, third party. Like you're telling the website, hey, if you click yes, you allow the third party cookies to track you. What that means is like they get to set their own cookies on your client side browser. It depends on the legal firm you go to. But I would say a lot of people try to break it up into here's your analytic cookies, here's your performance cookies. There's so many different types. Functional cookies is one of them, right? Functional being that Bob's Boot Shop requires these cookies in order for it to run correctly.
Well, so what would be some examples of that? Like maybe personalization, right? Or like being able to complete a purchase. Like what would be some examples of literally, I need you to accept some of these cookies, otherwise like what would happen to the site?
So now this is where kind of the GDPR and PII, PHI in the US, right, comes in.
PII, what are those?
Personally identifiable information, or
That's PII. And then what does GDPR stand for?
General Data Protection Regulation.
Perfect. You definitely didn't look that up. You knew it off the top of your head.
Yeah.
Just want to define the terms because I think like PII is like personal information, like your passwords and stuff, right? And then GDPR, like what does that generally mean? I know that's a lot of big words. What does it kind of really mean?
It just means like your name, your email, your location, your IP address, because you can identify a person's computer or location based off their IP. It's anything that can tie you back to you as a person in real life. So there's two ways that companies do this, right? They leverage like a secured vault in some way, right? Where it's a database that's already been thoroughly checked and audited for compliance reasons in order to make sure that your personally identifying information is safe, right? Those are what fall into like the whole regulation side of things, right? Those are what start separating what's allowed or what's required or what you're consenting to when it comes to gathering this information as a website.
So now how does that all interact with each other? Like when I go to a cookie consent banner, there's a couple options. Sometimes I'll see like it's, you could toggle on required, only, or all cookies, or reject all. What's kind of happening behind the scenes for some of these selections?
Rejecting all obviously just make sure that none of these third-party cookies or even sometimes some first-party cookies are not running at all. It all goes back to your law firm. It depends on their interpretation of what the laws are, the GDPRs, the PIIs, right?
And your industry too, right? Like there's a lot of PII with like medical and insurance where like you're required to put in like social security numbers and super personal information versus a basic e-com site where you're just buying like Pokemon cards or something. Like it's not as strict or rigid, although there's still payment information you still got to worry about there, I guess, but it's not as super rigid.
There's certain companies that like that's all they do is protect information. Their main focus is to secure all of this information that's being passed from server to server. They don't leverage cookies per se, right? Because they're doing a server to server communication. Cookies is more like client side stuff, right? It's more for when you visit from your browser. And payment information, the only way I can see payment information really using or leveraging cookies nowadays is if you want to do more personalization stuff, right? And that goes back to consenting. Are you going to consent to having your data stored on the browser so we can leverage it again for personalization reasons or for marketing reasons? Analytical reasons, right?
I was going to ask on that. There's some analytics tools that require you to accept the cookies. Otherwise, you can't. It's a person in your analytics that you won't capture any of their data for, right? Like time on site, pages a session. It's a person who is maybe counted as a visitor, but then has zeros for all of their data as a line. Or you have to just exclude them as a person who didn't accept the cookie and like reduce your denominator to make sure that it maths up.
That's where a lot of marketers started like freaking out, when all these regulations started coming out, because like, how are they going to track you then? How are they going to be able to remarket back to you?
We were spoiled for so long and then we had to take it away and we're like, oh, what do we do now?
I mean, there's still ways to be able to still market back to the user, right? Like if they sign into your website, that is a whole different story because you're now agreeing to terms.
And that's the first party data that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Or I guess zero party data.
Yeah. And you're now agreeing to terms. You're agreeing to privacy policies. Yeah, you can like turn off the consent and make sure that the third party cookies don't fire. But once you start signing in and start agreeing to the terms, then you're allowing these first party cookies to essentially work, right?
Which is why a lot of people, when the world was becoming cookieless a couple of years ago, a lot of people were like, focus your marketing efforts, focus your time on getting more people into your systems. You can market them. You could do stuff with that data. We were spoiled for so long with this third-party data and having such easy access to it. In a perfect world, someone is motivated enough to create an account or be in your system, in your CMS, whatever, not CMS, whatever. They're in your system to
CRM.
I knew it was that analogy. My brain's totally off. But yeah, they're in your CRM to like actually do something with that, which is why it has become a priority more and more to do nurturing stuff, to capture this information. Even if it's not the whole pie, get the email, start doing something with it, you know?
There's still a lot that you can do without even having them accept these cookies, or I would say accept signing in, right? So it's like the whole thing of anonymous versus known users. With anonymous, you can still do personalization. It's going to be at a much larger type of scale, right? Versus a one-to-one. You could just personalize for this specific area, like a state.
You could also do behavior-based personalization on the site, right?
Yeah, and you can also do like on a page-to-page basis, right? Because that has no PII information. There's nothing that is telling the browser that you are Shiva if it's just page information. That's what a lot of companies didn't really like seem to think about. They thought more of like, we need to capture all their personal information and then we need to do that in order to do personalization. And it's like, no, you really don't. Like you can always store, hey, they visited these 3 pages in this cookie. And then when they come back, you can literally shape how the website looks for them because they visited those 3 pages. The only way to tell that is as long as it's not identifying them.
And just to be clear, this is way different than someone clicks on a paid search ad and you're personalizing that landing page based on the information in the ad, targeting, or other information that you're seeing there in the UTM parameters in the campaign and the ad copy. Like that's stuff that's present in the URL when they land on the page. So there's some personalization you could do on that side. There's behavioral based personalization. What's the tactical personalization? Like give me an example of something that's now lost without that cookie. Like what's a tactical example you could describe that I wouldn't be able to do without first party information?
Change a background based on your zip code.
I think a lot of like insurance companies do this. I don't get it. I talked to Tara Robinson about this, where one of the test ideas was like personalize the email based on the weather outside. I'm like, well, who's like, damn, it's raining outside. I definitely want to go to the insurance company now. It's so strange, unless maybe it's a big, like, the LA fires and stuff. Like if they've geo-targeted you to be in LA, maybe there's some personal, that's actually a really good use case, right? If you're State Farm and someone's coming in from an LA zip code, you could personalize the homepage on that. That's now lost, right?
You can't be as narrow anymore.
Got it.
That's why I mentioned earlier, like it's not as one-to-one, it's more broad, but you can still personalize based like around these specific parameters. I say parameters as in like, data that you're ingesting into your decision making, but there's also like the URL parameters. Like if you don't have third-party data turned on your website, right, and the user comes in through an ad with the URL, you can customize this URL still. Let's say your ad is based on geography. You can tell the URL to include a geography within it. And that's still not PII because it has no real personal identifying information in there. So Google, on the other hand, they're the ones that are targeting on the geography scale. So if you were to create a campaign in Google that says, hey, I want to target this location, LA, right? Your campaign, when they click that URL, you can essentially set in that URL LA for that campaign. This geography equals LA. And that's all a company really needs to then start personalizing. And they can personalize to LA. Now they can narrow it down a little more without even having to ask you to accept the cookie.
That was before, but now that's no
you can
there.
still do that now.
Oh, okay.
That's still a feature I would say you can still do, but you just can't strictly go ahead and then grab the browser details of that location. Like you can't grab their IP and then try to figure out where they're located. You can't do that. That's what you're consenting against when you do either accept or deny, right?
So you're saying the technology is kind of evolving to, there are goals that people are trying to do, target based on location, target based on demographics. Before, it was through some third-party cookies and some other means that were maybe, I don't want to say inherently nefarious, but it wasn't always pure consent on the user side to say, I will give you this information for you to do something with it. But now the technology is evolving to be able to accomplish those same goals, just not through the same means.
Yes and no, but I will say that like the URL example, the URL parameters, that's always been around.
And it'll always be around.
Yeah, there's nothing that's going to really just change what someone can add to a URL.
And that's first party data too, right? That's first party.
Right. Exactly. When you click on the ad, right, you're consenting to already using Google services in some ways. So it's okay to redirect you to now Bob's Boot Shop.
That's a whole other can of worms, right? Like just using Google Shopping, you're like almost automatically consented to the tracking that Google implores on that, which maybe you don't want. I know it's a whole other can of worms I'm not trying to go into, but I didn't realize by clicking on an ad, I'm consenting to something. And I'm like, wait, shit, do I want to consent to that? I don't know if I do.
Consenting is an action that you're taking to tell all these browsers, to tell all of these websites, hey, yeah, track me.
Or don't track me.
It's funny because in the marketing world, we really don't like being tracked ourselves, but we love the party, like all that data, for us. But then you talk to everyday people outside of our industry and marketing, and they're like, yeah, track me, I don't care. I wanted to like give me exactly what I'm looking for.
Relevant ads.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's the same thing where like Google Chrome, you're so invested in the ecosystem of like password saved, multi-factor authentication, to ads, your profile. Like my profile is so robust in Google. And like some people would be like, you want to tracking everything? I'm like, the trade-off of convenience is worth the tracking. So happily take it. And if it means I get additional ads for Jordans that I don't need, but are definitely relevant to me, cool.
Yeah.
Fine.
I would say the broadness of consenting, not consenting. Now I want to talk about a little more of the personalization, like optimization and like analysis side, right?
Can I bring a question into that?
Post-production Shiva here. Are you loving this episode so far? Probably. I mean, Eddie's incredibly smart, and you've listened to like 25 minutes of this episode so far, so you probably love it. Did you know we have a companion newsletter for this episode? You'll want to dig into this one specifically because Eddie's going to be sharing much more thoughts and fleshing out a lot more nerdiness from this episode in case you want to dig deeper. It's free. I just need your email to know how to send it to you. So go ahead, subscribe from A to B.beehive.com. So from A to B.beehiiv.com. Also, there's a really cool Women in Experimentation Summit that y'all should definitely go subscribe to. It's a free event. There's a lot of really amazing speakers. The cause is amazing. Free ticket. Did I mention it's free? A lot of free stuff today. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe. There's a longer link, but I created a shorter link. It's tinyurl.com/from A to B WIE. So tinyurl.com/from A to B WIE. So go ahead, subscribe. It's a free ticket. Maybe giving away some from A to B merch in case you guys are interested. So go ahead, subscribe. Now let's get back to the show.
What I really do want to understand is how do cookies impact A/B testing tools, client and server side? If you could, in super layman's terms, describe the order of events and the process. Let's start with client side and client side testing tools. How does cookie affect that? What goes on in the order of events and kind of what's happening there?
There's two thoughts here. And the issue that I am seeing in the industry right now is that everyone is more concerned with one of these ways, which is a testing tool getting users to accept cookies or accept consent to being tracked by an A/B testing tool, right? Because it's third party, right, in some way. They're concerned with, how can I make sure that my A/B testing tool actually is accurate? What they don't realize is a lot of these tools, as long as it's not collecting PII information, It's not collecting any details that give anything about you away. It should be able to run without having, in some shape or form, consent, because it's numbers. All it is in reality, A/B testing is just numbers. It's how many users visited this variable, how many users visited this variable, how many users out of those variables then went on to do a specific action.
I mean, we're all numbers at the end of the day, right? We're all ones and zeros. That's all it all is.
Yeah. So a lot of people started getting worried about their A/B testing tool not being able to collect this kind of data. And if you think about it, it's all it really is doing is trying to do an analysis around behavior in some like not even revenue, but I'm trying to break it down based on the click action, or if they scroll down, right? None of that is PII. None of that is information that is going to be relevant to you as a person. I wouldn't even say user strictly. I would say like it's an anonymous user, because you don't even have to tie a person to this, right? That's where it gets a little sticky though for some of these tools, because a lot of these tools do segmentation, right? They have segments, they have audiences that they build. Now they're starting to get a little more narrow. And that's where I talk about, I try to show it as like, it's a funnel as well. It's like how much, what type of data are you collecting? And as you start trying to narrow it down to the person, that's when you start running into these privacy issues and the GDPR.
To be clear, when you're saying that, it's analyzing the user behavior in the testing tool, not analyzing that user behavior in, let's say, your analytics platform, right? So some of this is almost leaning towards testing tools may need to just be really good at randomizing and then leave the analytics work to the analytics platform and just make sure you're really good at randomizing, make sure you're really good at like keeping code firing as quickly as possible and protecting yourself from QA and stuff like that, but almost like leave the heavy lifting to the analytics platforms, because they're the ones that are going to have to deal with all of that stuff anyway.
That's a big reason why you see like Apple and StatSig starting to go on the native warehouse integration side of things.
Interesting. Yeah.
They're trying to do the randomization, they're trying to do the assignment, but then leave like all the analysis within the company itself.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I want to ask a follow-up. So what you described here is more in the data piece of the test. So the data, push it into the warehouse, your analytics, whatever. If we split it up that way, then it's not, I think to summarize, you're basically saying like, it's not as big of a deal as people are making it out to be with cookie stuff. As long as you're not dealing with PII, I guess maybe that's a follow-up question I'll ask you a little bit later. It's like, how do you deal with it if it's PII? But I want to table that for a sec. What I'm also interested in is the actual experience for the user on the site with cookies. Because hypothetically, if I go to the site, I haven't to a brand new site that I've never seen before once. You're landing on the homepage and they're running an A/B test on the hero, right? Above the fold, and it's client side. So when we say client side, the code is executing on the client side, not on the server. There's a big opportunity for some kind of flicker, some type of odd experience where you're not in the experiment until you've accepted the cookies, or possibly there's a flicker. Talk to me about how that reflects on the user experience side when they actually go to the website. Is there an opportunity for flicker if they accept or reject? Like, kind of walk me through that scenario.
I'm going to use Adobe as an example here because they tend to not care about you on a first time visit.
On the first page visit or the first session as a whole?
Let's say first session as a whole, and I would say because at that very moment, they understand that privacy is involved, and on top of it, they need to set identifiers for the person. They need to be able to set like if this person's going to accept the cookie or not. Like there's a lot of things that they know that on the first page visit ever, there's a lot of processes involved. They tend to not even try to showcase that or like do any kind of client side testing, because they also understand there's flicker involved if they try to do
client side testing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's because the way that setting an identifier in Adobe, it takes about 4 seconds, 5 seconds for it to go from the website to Adobe and then back to the website. It takes about 4 seconds in total. So they don't even want to try to set a variation or show you an experiment within that first visit because they understand that it's going to flicker already. Google Optimize were like one of the pioneers when it came to this, but what they would do instead is hide the website for 4 seconds.
That's not great.
Yeah, of course not. And that's one reason why Google Optimize was never really as reliable. It was a free tool, of course, but that was one reason why it wasn't as reliable, because imagine some of your users were waiting 4 seconds on a blank page just to make sure that they can do everything it needs to do.
And by the way, this isn't necessarily unique to cookie stuff. I think that's one of the major limitations with client-side testing is, unfortunately, the delay in code and flicker. It is a problem that client-side has. There are trade-offs where it could be faster, it could be easier to write some code. There are trade-offs, and I know that's a different conversation on client versus server side, but I don't want to paint it as this is an issue with cookies specifically with client-side. That's kind of just a limitation with client-side testing as a whole. Maybe worse with cookies, but it's still a problem with client-side testing regardless.
Yeah, it's a problem mainly if you're trying to do identifying, like set identifiers for users and IDs and etc.
What do you get if you don't set the identifiers? Like, is it just impossible to run a test?
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it is. If you're going to try to do a lot of client-side testing and you're having issues with Wicker, what I would just suggest is like, don't test above the fold on client side. Everything, just start testing below the fold for client side. Anything that you actually want to run above the fold should essentially be done server side. Let the server serve the variant, not the browser randomize all that. And then try, like there's still a delay in the decision making of all that happening with the computer, right? Because it has to do the randomization, and then from the randomization it has to do the allocation. And after the allocation, now you can essentially say, oh, this user was allocated in variant 1, so we have to show variant 1. And that's, like I said, where a lot of issues run into client side, because it still has to do all these processes. It can take milliseconds, it can take seconds. It depends also on the user's internet speed.
So are cookies required for client-side testing?
That's why I go back to it. It's like, it depends on how narrow you get. How narrow are you trying to get with your users? And when you segment, when you build any kind of audiences, right? If you do 50-50 split to 100% of your audiences and you're doing a test that doesn't require any kind of personally like identifiable information, then no, you really don't. It's just numbers at that point. This is something I would do back in the day. We would build a JavaScript function to do the tests on the server side versus having to leverage a third-party tool.
Server-side cookies. What does that look like? What is that? It seems like that's far less of an issue than the client-side implication. Is it something that you don't even really have to think about?
Like I said, it just depends where you're storing in those cookies. So if a server's setting the cookie, that's already zero-party, first-party cookie setting.
So it's interesting that you're almost saying, and I think you said this, but I'll repeat it again. The issue with cookies isn't necessarily server versus client side. That's an irrelevant variable. If we want to go super nerdy CRO experiment, it's a variable that's not super duper relevant compared to the way more important variable that's, do you have PII? Yes or no? All right, now let's ask the follow-up hard question. Let's talk about PII and A/B testing. What can you do? Well, I'm not going to say what you can do. I'm going to say what should you do when you have A/B testing and PII? What are the ways to address to make sure that you're protecting yourself, the business, but also still able to test?
So let's say you're testing around email newsletters, right? You're collecting emails now for your test.
And the email would be the PII.
Your personal email that you used that's what's the PII. And let's say that you're running this through an A/B test. And I want to give Klaviyo as an example here because they have A/B testing for email newsletters and things like that. You would have to have consent to even run that.
So consent meaning I guess when they sign up for an email or sign up for a newsletter, they consent into all of that stuff. So that's where they've given the consent to the newsletter, right? That's at that step they've accepted it. And you have to have that in your legal writing and the privacy policy and the terms and conditions of the newsletter is they agree to that, right?
That's where it's like they're consenting now to allow you to use the email address as like to store it, not because Klaviyo obviously is a email marketing platform, so they have to store that data. Now you're also consenting to like being A/B tested on that newsletter.
I want to ask a different example here because I think it could be interesting to explore checkout A/B testing because that has PII with credit card information, address, phone number, whatever. So let's say you're buying boots at Bob's Boot Shop. Great. Bob's Boot Shop's killing it. You want to go through that process of buying boots in this shop. At that point, I guess theoretically, they would have had to accept the cookies when they land on the site. And if that's the case, then you're protected, I guess. Is that fair to say? If they accept the cookies at the beginning, then you could A/B test in the checkout. No questions asked. But if they reject the cookies at that point, then you cannot A/B test in the checkout because it requires PII.
Yes, I would say yes.
So in the logic here is when you're A/B testing, that rejection has to be tied to an exclusion of certain A/B tests as you think through your strategy.
Yes and no. It just depends what the A/B test is doing and then what is it collecting.
Right. This sucks because you have to think through the strategy of your test so much more with this cookie stuff. But if you run an A/B test in a checkout and they do not accept the cookies, you have to set a signal that they've rejected the cookies and you have to append that to the user in your testing tool to make sure that any test in the checkout, logically, will include PII. And therefore, I guess it's like you'd have to have two different conditions, right? Because if they reject cookies, but they log in, technically that they could still be included in the experiment.
Kind of goes back to it depends on your legal firm. But
so I guess if you have really smart lawyers, you could do whatever the fuck you want.
They'll
just squish around terms.
There's companies like they don't care either. They pay the fees. They'll just pay the fees. Like they'll
eat the cost. That's so stupid. It's like accessibility, right? They just eat the cost, even though the site is literally not readable to a person who's maybe blind or reading impaired. That's just, I hate that. Sorry, I hate that. I'm going to continue on this example though. In the checkout, when let's say they haven't logged in and they've rejected the cookies, because they have not consented through the login, and they've also not consented through rejecting the cookies. Those are two targeting signals that if you run a checkout test, you have to say, reject this person. They will not be included in any A/B test on the checkout because it has PII.
This is where it gets technical.
Okay.
So client side, it is very risky. Yeah, I wouldn't say to do it. But on the server side, as long as if you're serving two different variants on the server, and as long as it's not like your data, whatever you're sending data wise for those two variants, don't include any PII, you can still technically run the test.
Got it.
So what happens is a lot of people will think that they need to include all of this user data when in reality they don't. They just need to say user 1 hit this one, user 2 hit this one, blah, blah, blah. It's just user counts, right? In the end of it, it's just numbers as long as there's no PII. And let's say there is PII in the data that you collected. That's where whoever's doing analysis, if it's all server side, if you're doing in-house experimentation, you're not leveraging a tool, right? There's supposed to be some form of process that will remove the PII information, but then continue pushing the numbers. Right.
So you can complete the order, you could have the information stored to complete the order, and then it gets removed, or it's protected.
Yeah. You can either do it real time, like remove the information as they proceed, or you can do it as soon as the order confirmation is done.
Removed, sorry, let me clarify. Removed from where?
The database. Wherever you're doing the data analysis.
So like in your CRM, it has to be stored there, right?
Yeah, but you would need to have acceptance for that to be stored there, for PII.
When they consent, when they complete the order.
Yeah.
So for example, you go through the checkout, you collect first name, last name, email, phone number, billing address, credit card information, but then they don't click submit. They haven't consented. So you have to metaphorically scrub the database, throw all the papers through the shredder, right? That's when they have not consented. So that information's got to go away quickly.
Yeah. There's technical ways to still A/B test, even if they haven't consented, but it all just depends on, as long as there's no PII, as long as there's nothing that identifies the user. And that's where a lot of these companies don't really think about, is that they see it as, oh, we need the user to consent so that we can use this data across every single tool we have. And that's not really the case all the time. It's more like you don't really need to get consent to pass numbers around.
Yeah, got it. All right, this was awesome, Eddie. This was dense. I've learned a lot on the tail end of like the PII. I always thought it was an issue with client versus server side. I didn't realize PII was like a way more important variable than like server versus client side. Although it does seem like the preference here is server side relieves a lot of woes, and that's preferential for those reasons. But any like quick summary or quick caveats you want to make sure people know? Because I think your DMs should be open to anyone who has follow-up questions here.
Yeah. First of all, I would say I'm not a lawyer, so you have to definitely talk to your lawyers about this, because they're the ones that will interpret the laws that you're trying to like work with, essentially, right? But I'm more than happy to help you architect and help you define what you can and can't try to test against or not. I've been working with many lawyers over the years around this information. That's why I said, talk to the lawyers, because I have lawyers that have said, yes, you using the website means you consent. Other companies say, no, you need to physically consent and click consent.
So A/B test the lawyers until you find the one that you like that tells you the information you want.
Yeah, and as long as you're willing to pay
Don't do
the
that.
fees.
That's bad advice. Don't do that. Shiva says don't do that. I'm kidding. I'm going to get sued, bro. You're going to get me in so much trouble.
Nah. That's why I said, just reach out to the lawyers if you really have any questions around your consent policies, because in the end of the day, it's going to save your pockets for sure in the long run. Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I know you're also working on some pretty cool things as well. As an optimizer you don't just optimize websites. You don't just optimize button colors, as your glorious merchandise shows. For the podcast listeners, he's wearing some exclusive from A to B merch. But you also optimize other things, right? What's some cool shit you're working on?
Ensure Financial, I basically optimize your spend accounting for the accounting teams. They have account payables and account receivables, and I've been able to figure out how to optimize like their account payables and be able to return them a guaranteed ROI on their spend/payables. So
amazing. Eddie, I feel like I need a break because that was really dense, but I really do appreciate how you very simplified a lot of these complex topics. And I know we got to the end of I think a lot of the meat and potatoes was at the end of the podcast, but I think it was really awesome to start a little bit slower. Let's define everything. Let's understand how it all works. Because if we just talk about the end piece, it could actually be really complicated to understand. So this was amazing. You very much distilled some really complex topics into super easy to digest things. And your DMs are open for people to come talk to you. And, you're a consultant and you own Blazing Saddles. You own Blazing Growth. You own Blazing Growth. For people to come talk to you for some of that other information as well. But Eddie, amazing. Thank you so much for simplifying and giving some really, really awesome thoughts here.
yeah, thanks as well for having me, Shiva.